To discuss the issue in further depth, we are joined live by the Director of the Geopolitical Research Project for CommandEleven Consulting in Islamabad, Shahid Raza. Welcome to Radio Sputnik, Shahid.
Hello, how are you?
Very well, yourself?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you.
Excellent. First question, why do you think the White House decided to use the so-called mother of all bombs in Afghanistan, and why now?
Okay, the first thing you need to understand, and I've been following this event ever since it happened, and one of the things we do at CommandEleven is we study weapon systems. So in order to understand why did they use this particular weapon at this particular time, is that you've got to understand the weapon itself. This MOAB, which stands for Massive Ordnance Air Blast, and if you focus on the air blast, that itself describes that this weapon explodes in the air, producing a thermobaric effect. So it's not a penetrator weapon. So when they're saying that they actually used it to destroy an underground cave fortress, that may not be completely true, because this weapon never hits the ground. It produces a thermobaric effect. It sucks up all the oxygen, and it destroys every living and breathing being in a certain its blast radius, which is around 2.5 kilometers. So you have to understand the weapon itself. And why did they use it is quite interesting. I believe it has everything to do with geopolitics. First, they attacked the Syrian airbase based on information which is less than accurate in our opinion, because there's no tangible evidence to say that Assad actually did use those weapons over there. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. There's no evidence to prove it. So, but they did go ahead and in a show of force, and they attacked the base, and the base is still active. So then the second event happens here in Afghanistan, and the Americans are also saber-rattling DPRK in the Korean Peninsula. So if you put these dots together, you see a geopolitical trend emerging. It is, and also again, there is a statement coming from the American representative, Mr. Kaufman, that this bombing in Nangarhar province is a message to quote-unquote America's enemies, and America's enemies lists keep growing. They are never short of enemies. So whoever stands against the U.S. interests or their expansionism or whatever their interests are, they are considered to be the U.S. enemies. So they're sending a geopolitical message by dropping this massive weapon in Afghanistan.
Some say the latest strike represents a shift in the White House policy, as it is now willing to use a more intensified approach to military action in the region. How likely is that?
I think they are, look, again, I will come back to the weapon itself. I think they are trying to intensify the campaign in Afghanistan for a number of geopolitical reasons. First thing you have to understand is that the instability in Afghanistan justifies the American presence in Afghanistan. So in order to have the American presence, the military presence in Afghanistan, you need to have some relative manageable degree of instability, because otherwise, if Afghanistan is completely peaceful, there's no need for foreign troops to be there. So again, if we go back to 2015, when one of the U.S. representatives, they visited North Waziristan, and they stated that U.S. might have to be in Afghanistan forever. So basically, they are looking at permanent air bases, permanent military bases in Afghanistan, and the weapon they used is an overkill. You don't really need a 21,600-pound bomb to kill 36 people, or 90 is the recent figure. It roughly makes up about $250,000 per person. It doesn't make any sense to use such a weapon on these, on these cave fortresses to kill an X number of people and to destroy a cave fortress. They are trying to intensify, and I think it has a lot to do with presenting Trump as a strong leader to the rest of the world, rather than anything else, because there are no more than 15,000 American troops left in Afghanistan, and most of them are in support roles. So they are trying to intensify the war over there because, in my opinion, the Trump administration will actually bring in more soldiers, because they will present IS as a much bigger threat than it really is. And it would justify the continued presence of the American forces in Afghanistan, in my opinion. And the real target for this whole exercise is multipolarity. It is to present America as the sole single superpower in the world, and nothing else is acceptable. The emerging rise of China and Russia and other countries. It's also quite interesting, in my opinion, to note that when they were actually attacking Syria, President Xi was having lunch with President Trump, and as it was happening. So it's quite interesting because they are posturing to present America as a resurgent superpower. So the real target for this entire exercise in Syria and DPRK and Afghanistan, in my opinion, it's a connected trend. You cannot understand them completely as a single case. So I believe the real target is multipolarity. They want to maintain America as the single superpower in the world.
You mentioned that some commentators have suggested that America will have to remain in Afghanistan forever. But how popular would such a move prove to be with the Afghan people, given that Afghans' rather turbulent history with outsiders?
Look, I think it's not going to prove popular at all. Not just with Afghanistan, but with the entire region, with Pakistan, with Russia, with the other countries who are connected with Afghanistan through a long, traditions going back many centuries. And I don't think that any country is going to appreciate a continued occupation of Afghanistan. And it can't be better exemplified than the commentary coming from the former President Karzai and the current, one of the chief administrator in Afghanistan, Mr. Abdullah, and they're talking completely different tones. They are talking in complete contrast. They have a completely different point of view on this attack. So Karzai is stating that, okay, you're using our country as a test range for your weapon systems. And Abdullah is trying to save face. He's saying that, okay, they took us on board. By the way, there's no evidence that they actually took Abdullah or anybody else, for that matter, on board from the Afghan's National Unity Government. And I think it will result in massive lack of support for the Trump administration. And if they try to intensify the war in Afghanistan, it actually harms the interests of all the countries I've mentioned before, namely Pakistan, China, Russia, Iran, because those countries are now trying to form a coalition to bring peace in Afghanistan, to return the Taliban to the table, to bring them to negotiations. And also, there's a peace drive happening in Russia at the moment. They're hosting a round of peace talks. So I think the timing is quite interesting. On one hand, these countries are joining hands to bring the Taliban, the insurgency, under control through political means, through a peaceful solution. And on the other hand, the Americans are intensifying warfighting efforts. So I think it says something there.
And lastly, what other moves do you expect from the US administration on Afghanistan?
I think Afghanistan, in my opinion, and it's going to be an interesting place for the next decade. From our projections, what happens in Afghanistan from now on, it has to be seen in the context of a presumed Russian intervention in Afghanistan. The Americans are starting to talk about a Russian intervention in Afghanistan for at least of some kind. We're talking about military intervention here, not just the political or the diplomatic intervention, which is already underway because Russia is conducting peace talks between different warring factions and taking different countries on board and trying to create a regional solution for Afghanistan. But what Americans are afraid of is that the Russians are going to intervene in Afghanistan militarily, and it's going to make their option complex. So they're taking preemptive efforts to make sure that there is no need for the Russians to actually invade Afghanistan or, let's say, intervene in Afghanistan in some military capacity. So their calculus, that the interests and everything they've calculated over there, they're not complicated, and they're able to manage the conflict to their own interests. And I would say what will happen is, under Trump administration, at least some kind of military increase will happen in Afghanistan. The total war fighting footprint, the soldiers, boots on the ground, Air Force, other assets will be mobilized in Afghanistan, and it will all be justified by the presence of IS in Afghanistan because they have created a new enemy. And by using such weapons on such targets, which don't really need to use such a weapon on those K fortresses, you're giving a lot of attention. And talking about the Americans, you're giving a lot of attention to IS and trying to pose IS threat as a very serious threat, which isn't true. You have to understand what IS is. The IS Khorasan in Afghanistan is actually Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. After they were defeated by Pakistan in the northern areas in Waziristan, they migrated to the bordering provinces like Nangarhar, like other provinces, and they rebranded themselves into IS Khorasan So basically, it's the Pakistani Taliban taking refuge in Afghanistan, and now they are being presented as a massive threat in order to justify the increased and intensified U.S. presence, military presence in Afghanistan, because of a perceived geopolitical threat from Russia, China, or other countries. They're trying to create a coalition to deal with this threat peacefully.
Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time, but thank you very much for that very interesting analysis. That was the director of the Geopolitical Research Project for CommandEleven Consulting in Islamabad, Shahid Raza.